this video we're going to be taking a look at historical miniature painting. Taking a miniature that's based on something that existed in real life and painting it accordingly, as accurate as possible. While I typically work on models within the fantasy, sci-fi sort of settings that are open to own interpretation and personal creative flair, these are typically from tabletop or wargaming. And there are historical miniature war games out there. They do fall into this play space. However, in all honesty, and this is just a personal thing, no discredit to those that enjoy playing historical war gaming at all, something just never really sits quite right for me in terms of it, because it's living history. It's something that's actually happened rather than something that's fictional. I mean, in all fairness, wargaming is not the thing that I'm in this for. I like painting minis. That being said, the art behind historical miniatures and models is something that I'm really drawn to. It's important that we preserve and document history in any shape or form so that we and future generations can learn from it. Written word is immeasurably useful, but it doesn't quite contextualise a subject the same way as a photograph, archive footage, artefact, replica or scale model. Museums exist so that all these forms of media can come together to give us an engaging, diverse and all-round more impactful learning experience. And so for this video, and to further improve my basing skills and technique, I'm going to be working on a contained diorama. So let's get into how we're going to do that. I found these relatively inexpensive Tamiya World War II US Army infantry in 1/35th scale, of which is a completely new scale for me. Before even opening the box, I looked for sources of inspiration, particularly from period-specific photographs, avoiding Hollywood movies. I wanted to avoid grandstanding visualisation, gravitating more towards a slice of life and giving the viewer of said miniature a taste of that. World War II was sparked by the Nazi invasion of Poland, lasting for 6 years from 1939 to 1945, and saw more than 50 nations in the world fighting. It was one of the darkest times in human history, and now acts as a cautionary reminder of the atrocities and cost of war, so that we as a society do not repeat it. So with this information and imagery ingrained into my mind, let's take a look at the contents of this box. We have 2 sealed sprues and some instructions in various languages. It's also good to note as well, the box art actually gives you some information in terms of how to paint the miniatures, as well as squad and infantry markings that more daring miniature painters might want to attempt to do freehand. So taking a look at the sprues, we've got some really high detailed models, however there's a lot of mould lines that we're going to have to get rid of. Using the back of my X-Acto blade, once I've cut parts out, I started scraping some of those mould lines off, and then began the process of gluing the parts together. Once I'd completed the soldiers, I needed a base to put them on. And while these 75mm by 46mm Games Workshop bases, I did a few bits of test fitting just to get a feel for this, so to make sure that I was happy with this choice. There's enough space on these so that I can fit 2 miniatures and include some interesting points with basing material to give the impression of the land or environment that they're standing in. But with this being said, I didn't commit to gluing any of these miniatures down. I wanted to treat the miniatures and the bases as 2 separate subjects. And so let's start building up some texture and create an environment. Using cork, I ripped some parts out and glued this onto the base to create texture and an uneven landform. For one of the bases, I started cutting pieces of spare sprue that I had into little tiny bricks.
Recycle! The possibilities are endless.
And so I started building a ruined brick wall, just to try and create a bit of narrative and story, as if it's been there for a while and might not have been damaged during warfare. Once I was happy with these, I used some sterling mud to create even more texture, covering all the bases with this. and then I used a Grelin Badland on the back of the wall just to try and create a plaster or drywall effect on one of the sides. I should have probably included this part in the assembly stage, and as I'm doing this kind of in sub-assemblies, I temporarily glued the miniatures onto these spare bits of sprue just to give me something to hold on to while I'm painting these miniatures. And well, I base coated them in a Baden Black and dry brushed white scar to create a zenithal highlight. And so let's just get into painting these. I used Auroch Flesh to pick out some of the highlights on the suits. Using Cadian Flesh Tone and a smaller brush, I picked out some of the raised features on the face. I'm not amazing at painting faces, and it's something that I'm really trying to work on, and so I wanted to use these slightly larger miniatures just to practice with this. To add character and individuality to the miniatures, I gave one of them a black beard, kind of resulting in a bit of a Captain Haddock look, and then gave another one a 5 o'clock shadow, painting this with grey and lightening it down a little bit with a fleshy wash. Finally, I wanted a medic in the group, so I had a go at freehanding a red cross, following the reference on the box. To do this, there was a lot of back and forth between white and red, but I think I managed to do a relatively good job. It's not perfect, but it doesn't really matter too much that it's a little bit janky. So with the soldiers now painted, it's now time to work on the ground that they're going to be standing in. Once I'd completed painting the bases, it was now time to cut the miniatures off their handles. Just lightly X-Acto blading these off as I didn't put too much glue on. These were incredibly easy to remove. I then began super gluing the miniatures to the bases, and even at this stage I'm really happy with how these miniatures have turned out, but I think we can definitely do more with this in terms of the bases. Using dry green and swamp tufts, battlefield grass and some lichen, I used PVA glue to set this all down. I didn't want to completely cover the muddy ground that I'd created, but did want to have some grassy features come through, particularly on the raised areas. I added moss tufts to the base of the walls, just to add to the effect that they'd been there for some time. I then broke down a little bit of the lichen and PVA glued these to the wall just to make it look like there's been some foliage growing along them over the years. I had this miniature scale barbed wire laying around, and so I thought this would be a good opportunity to add this. So the miniature's trudging through the field just because there wasn't really too much going on. So I cut it to size and wrapped it around my dry brush just to give the size that I needed. I then lightly super glued this down onto the base of the model, cutting off any excess as well. And once this has been completed, I then painted some water soluble rust onto this just to blend it in with everything else. And well, I think that's these miniatures done. Let's go to the grand reveal.